I decided to start this yearly Monstercat series off with 2017 for a simple reason. It's the first year where I actively know about Monstercat's history and where a lot of the big names made their debuts. If I were to describe 2017, I would describe it as the uncanny valley for Monstercat, where a lot of the content on Monstercat could be hit or miss. The hits remain classics for a reason, since they were the best that Monstercat has to offer, and was able to toe the bridge between the old Monstercat sound and, at least at the time, the new sound they were trying to go for. But when Monstercat missed, they missed badly, with a wide range of singles that have either badly aged, sound really cheap, or were bad debuts from artists that have thankfully moved past their respective singles. But that's the irony here. I don't feel much anger or rage behind most of these tracks. Keyword being most. The worst of 2017 could best be described as, yeah, it's bad, but at least it was during a switch up when the number of comps ended with 030, and it's not like these artists are making these songs now, or at the very least they moved on to do better things. There are of course exceptions, and we will cover them, but there's a level of charity I give towards this list as opposed to years like 2020 or 2021. Fair warning, there's going to be a lot of controversial opinions on this list, so I guarantee an artist or song that you like is going to show up. So with that said, let's start the list proper. No remixes or VIPs, and only 2 songs per artist in the top 10. That way it's at least fair. But without further ado, let's start with our dishonorable mentions. I think most people would agree that Dion Timmer's early songs were rough. And while I think Panic is the best example of that, Lost, it's not that far off. While I do like the vocal chops, the rest of the production is really underwhelming. The synth lead doesn't have enough power or melody to be remotely engaging. When you combine it with that really generic trap percussion and the empty feeling of the song, yeah, it's safe to say I'm glad Dion Timmer was able to move past this. Ah yes, the notorious single that's more known for the music video than because the song is good. Between the standard house percussion, the gurgling synths that add nothing to the song, and an annoying vocal sample saying mash up the place, make it boom until your ears get numb, it's only missing this list because I could see some ironic appeal to this, but only if you view the music video. And you have to do that, you've already lost. I remember the divisive reaction last year for the song Full Speed by Topi and Have. Most people had an issue with Topi's weird sound design and how it felt like a bunch of random sounds trying to create some melody, but failing to do so. For me, the song was good, but it's middle of the road for Topi, who gained a reputation for interesting and voyeuristic sound design, and has a few songs that I really like, such as Bad Language, Backup, and his newest single, Wide Open. That said, there is a limit for me, and it's this. Between the awful sound block that is the snare to the rigid flow of the sounds on the drop, it's got this awkward vibe going for it. It honestly feels more like a flex for Topi to show off his sound design skills rather than a song that makes you want to dance. And it's especially apparent when there's no groove to this beyond the stiff elements. So whoever enjoys this, you can have it. Better yet, let me swap this with whatever else you have.
Melody mania, don't break the spell, don't take me out.
This is Here I'm Principal Alone. There was no need for Anna Yevitz to make a vocal edit of Melodynamia, which takes a perfectly fine house tune from the pegboard nerds and fills it with doo-doo-doos and cheesy lyrics. And it's not the endearing kind of cheesy either. All while Anna Yevitz sounds genuinely bored to be here. Just why?
I wanna live in a world without you.
When I first heard this song, I originally kind of liked it. Most of it was because of Kayzo's vocal chops. That was until I realized, oh wait, nothing's actually happening. The song opens up with 2 seconds of silence for no reason, and when the song actually starts, it takes a guitar lick from Mr. Props' Waves, and then leaves it stranded with some sparse flutes and Dylan Matthews' non-existent melodrama about him leaving a relationship because of the fake love, and that nothing's changing, before stating how much he can't live without her. The most obvious problem being that the hook contradicts the rest of the verses. But even with that, I could see this as tolerable if the drops were good, but they're just not. And while Kayzo tries to add some personality with the vocal chops, you're still stuck with Slander for the primary influence as they badly transition into the drop, and once we get to said drop, they contain these flat saw pads that don't contain any groove or drive. Yeah, I get why everyone hates this now. As for Slander, well, we'll come back to them. On some level, Lucas has the workings of a decent trap artist thanks to On My Own, and Alarm was fun enough. This, on the other hand, was pretty irritating to listen to, and it's easily his worst single on the label. Who on earth told Lucas that these hollowed out squawking synth leads were a good idea? Furthermore, why is it the only melodic element on the drops? I hear people trying to bring in Dirty Audio for comparison on this, but at least Dirty Audio's leads had some semblance of charm and had more going on in the production. This, on the other hand, feels like more of a cheap copy of Dirty Audio's music without any of those redeeming elements. In other words, it's bad. Next.
I'm only sweet when I'm high. I'm only sweet when I'm high. I'm only sweet when I'm
Now this, well, this is just amusing. A song that's trying to convey Mr. Blonde as cool, where she just sounds like she's cosplaying for 3 minutes and 10 seconds, with referencing Harley motorcycle, learning to lie in school to pretty boys, and let's not forget she's got that good stuff, American pride. It doesn't help matters that the production is this dull attempt at fusing jazz and rock elements, and it just does not work at all. Unlike Pluto's got more reputation for Everything Black, becoming one of Monstercat's biggest hits of the year, and as such, this got left behind and forgotten. Probably for the better.
1, 2, 3.
I could see the backlash with this one, and on some level between the Halloween theme and the brazen nature, I can understand why people like this. The off drops are decent at least, but my gosh, I can't stand those synth leads. They sound like violins in the process of dying. And that somehow gets worse when the hardstyle switch up starts with these brazen in-your-face kicks that the whole track just becomes hype, but worse for me. I'll admit, Tokyo Machine is not exactly my niche, but I do respect his style and he can come up with some great melodies. That said, the melodies should be at least tolerable to listen to and not, you know, sounding like dying violins. But now on to the list proper, starting with number 10. 2017 was a big year for hardcore music, and two of the biggest names in the genre were Darren Styles and Stonebank. The former debuted on the label this year and gained critical acclaim thanks to the hit Us Against the World, a great hardcore track with a strong melody and adventurous atmosphere. For the latter, Stonebank has been around since the early days of Monstercat. He's always made hardcore songs like Stronger and Pressure, but I argue this was the year where his style really cracked through with Ripped to Pieces. That song had a darker edge to it and I really liked it and made it stick out from the rest of the hardcore songs. So you think combining these two would make for a good song, even with a different brand name, and yet... For those of you unaware, Zero Hero is a collaboration project between Darren Styles and Stonebank respectively. It was originally intended for other genres like future bass and pop. In other words, genres that Darren Styles and Stonebank aren't known for. But while teasing this new alliance, this was their first song they put out. And it was a bad first impression. It's an endlessly repetitive, flat psytrance song with a kick that has no power and has to rely on synth accents that barely get any spotlight. And when they do, they also have next to no power. You'd think for for some of the most beloved hardcore acts on the label, you hope for something that hits a little bit harder than this. But that's not even the worst moment about this song. No, that's the horrible hard trap section where the percussion is buried against that ear-splitting lead. And that's before I mentioned the lead doesn't even sound on beat. So what you have is a song by two great hardcore acts that acts as a band introduction to their new Elias, where most of the track is underpowered, and at its worst, it sounds painful. At least they have Sky is Falling and Twilight for some great songs, because this, just no. Number 9. But sticking to the topic of hardcore, let's cover some newer acts on the label. While Darren Styles and Stonebank were considered the most beloved members of the hardcore genre this year, a new act debuted on the label and found success. Kayzo, combining hardcore with trap and dubstep to create a style that felt fresh and distinctive, with his songs This Time and Holy creating energetic material for live festivals. I'm not the biggest fan of these songs, but they have their place. So you think a collaboration with another hardcore act that's not tied to a separate project would be some form of hardcore, maybe even dubstep? Not whatever this is. What was the goal here? I have to ask because this feels like this has no other reason to exist beyond the sentiment of doing something different. Because that can work, but that often requires some of what makes each individual act stand out. And this has none of that. It has none of Kayzo's rougher texture or energy that made songs like This Time or Holy. Instead, it relies on this happy, deep house formula that was so prevalent in 2016 and doing it badly. August tries for some radio-friendly, energetic approach to his vocal delivery, but he legit sounds like he couldn't wait to leave the recording booth. And that's before we get into the production, with the xylophones having little presence on the verses and the drops are worse. The bass line sounds flat, lacking any drive or punch, the trap percussion sounds out of place, and the most prominent element are the most annoying vocal chops I've ever heard for a song like this. Which I guess is emblematic of Gammer's work, but given how it'll show up on this list later, that's not exactly a good thing. So congratulations, you did something different. You made a dollar store cheat code song. I hope it was worth it. Number 8. For this next part, we're gonna have to get into some controversy. Or I would say that, but the truth is the song is bad enough it would have made this list regardless. And while I don't think the main act is playing this nowadays, a lot of those bad vibes are still here. Oh, I'm guessing a lot of you were expecting a certain someone to show up when I talked about getting into some controversy. Oh, don't worry, we'll get into him later. But for now, we're starting with this because it's from a bad debut from an act I actually like. Dirtyphonics were actually the first act to get me into dubstep in the first place. I like their sharper sound design, their industrial texture, and their horror show tracks can sound awesome. Took a look at Evil Inside with Boss Fight, or Vanta Black with Sullivan King. And they had a good year in 2017 as well, with Side of Your Soul, as well as the rest of the Vanta Black EP, getting some critical acclaim. So it's hard to imagine that a song like this was their debut on the album, because this song sounds awful. The sound design feels slimy in the worst way possible. That croaking lead sounds unpleasant to hear in the verses, and it gets to the point where Ragged Twin's usual vocal filters also get the treatment. Blends in with the lead and makes an already bad sound design worse. And the horrible sound design continues with the drops, with that slimy lead being the most prominent element, and it just sets me off every time. If anything, this feels like Goom's predecessor, a Sablefire track that made me feel queasy because of how uncomfortable the sound design got. But it wasn't until the 4th drum and bass switch up that I realized what this was trying to do. Because wow, this sounds like a really bad ripoff of Ragabomb that swap out some of the decent reggae elements in favor of a song that feels like the worst swamp you've ever been to. Watch out indeed. Number 7. I've always made it a rule that disappointing songs will get you higher on a list than just plain bad songs. Now, that's not always the case. For example, Swarm by Kuro. While I'm not the biggest fan of that song, it was disappointing. The song was okay. It didn't have too many bad elements in order to make the list. But disappointment could certainly be a factor, and when your song is this bad, plus it's by an artist that you respect, it has a high chance of making the list for me. Because if there was a clutter mess of a song that's aged rather badly in 2017, it's this. there's something that feels wrong putting Nitro Fun on a list like this. I really liked his old school chiptune design with songs like Soldier, and his recent return with World Wide Web and Power. That was great too. But again, just like with Over the Edge, I have to wonder what the goal was. On the one hand, it's trying to be this Porter Robinson language-esque melodic bass track, and the other is trying to be this peppy, sugary chiptune track with gang vocals and trap elements. I wouldn't have such an issue if the execution wasn't so poor for everything here. The vocal chops to start out the song sound really annoying, the chiptune lead fits with nothing on the build-up, and the drops sound underwhelming because the saw pads are buried in the mix. So the weak piano is left stranded. And as soon as the second half of the drop showed up with the out-of-place trap percussion, gang vocals, and even more annoying vocal chops, I just checked out. I get on some level that this meant something to Nitro Fun, is about him being homesick while making this track, so he reaches out to his friends to help him, but when the song sounds this bad, it's gonna make the list. Number 6. So 2017 was the year that Monstercat crossed over with Psychotics' favorite sports game, Rocket League. A partnership that lasted for quite a while, and I'd argue one of the bigger platforms to bring artists to a bigger demographic. It's why a lot of the songs signed nowadays are from Silicon Instinct in order to accommodate for less releases. But when Rocket League first started out with Monstercat, they released their own crossover album. And while there are a fair bit of great songs like Weapon, Bone Dry, and Outbreak, there are a few songs that almost made the list. 0202 by Eminence was one of the last cuts as it was over repetitive and boring, and Apex by Vice Tone, that was no different. And yeah, while those songs were bad, this is in a league of its own.
I love you, I do need you, I do I do need you, I love you, I do need you, I do need you,
On some level, I get why Slushii is not only on this compilation, but he was on the label so consistently. He had that marshmallow connection, he had some of that blend between future bass and a brighter texture. So keeping him around, while I have mixed thoughts on that, for marketing, it's a smart choice. But man, there are points where Slushii's catalog brought the worst elements of older Marshmello songs. While he's not trying to mix EDM and country together into some terrible fusion like Marshmello's newer work, the annoying side of his older work peaked with Love You Need You. The repetitive chipmunk vocals, the horrible sounding dripping, the Jersey Club switch up that does not work at all. It all creates this irritating experience. It's an earworm, sure, but it's the worst kind of earworm, where it gets in your head even though you don't want it, stays there, and it makes you hate it even more than the first time. And yet, for some reason, despite this has 40 million views on Spotify, which makes it Slushii's second biggest hit on the label, only behind All I Need. It was such a hit that, as of recording this, it was re-included in Rocket League's 10-year anniversary compilation. Joy. I don't need this, and I certainly do not love this. Number 5. But you know what? Say what you want about Slushii. At least it's not Aero Chord. As this series continues, we're going to be dealing with this guy and a lot of his terrible music that reveals way too much about him as a person. And while I try to be respectful for the vast majority of these artists, Aero Chord is not one of them, for obvious reasons given the sexual assault allegations. Once we get to 2018 and 2019, I'll have more to discuss. For now, separating the art from the artist, and Drop It really is just a generic trap cut that doesn't serve a purpose outside of Aero Chord being on the Rocket League compilation. The fake horns, the metallic trap percussion tap, only contributes to the artificial feeling of this track. I was never a fan of this guy's music, and Service remains the most overrated song on the label, but at least there is some energy behind his trap influences. How did we go from Love and Hate, which I'd argue was the only good EP of his, the cut with Fractal being one of my favorites from him on the label, to this AI-programmed trap instrumental where the energy dies before the song starts? Oh yeah, and then the acid elements towards the end of the song just get sucked into mediocrity. It's a standard bad track that contains none of the elements that made Aero Chord's music so appealing, and it sounds like filler just to get added to a game's soundtrack. We don't need to give this more attention. Number 4. Well, that sucked. Now let's get back to the standard program. Looking back at some of these songs where some of the artists started from, it's kind of amazing how most of them ended up recouping and are now making better music. And if they're not doing that, they're now moving on from the label and doing their own thing. Whatever it is, I wish them the best for it. This was another song made by a fairly known Monstercat artist. I contemplated leaving this song off the top 10 because of the improvements that he would later make in the early 2020s, and even if I wasn't the biggest fan of his latest album, he's at least a much better producer than he used to be. Then I re-listened to it. That ugly, goopy snare, the horrible vocal chops, the random tribal tans that do not fit at all. How a mixdown puts the snare and the vocal chops on the front. This was the beginning of Bishu's journey as a Monstercat mainstay, and while he's made some significant progress in 2020 to 2021, at the same time, oh wow, I forgot how bad some of his production was back then, with this being the worst out of all of his discography. Mainly because of that horrible sound design from Bishu's early work, as well as the flow being all over the place. But to my amazement, that's not even the worst part about this song. No, let's go to Light in her vocal performance. She was also starting out as a vocal performer who would go on to make much better material with Ocula, Embers, and Lay Youth. She even has a song that got remixed by Aero that's actually really good. But here, she just sounds awful. She sounds like Tones and I at her most obnoxious, with the forced inflections and overdramatic nature. All these elements create for an unpleasant experience throughout the whole track. It's a bad trap song that's somehow gotten worse with age. And while I'm not the biggest fan of Bishu's recent synth pop pivot nowadays on Micro Celebrity, at least it's not this. Number 3. And while we're on the topic of awful trap songs by newcomers, you know, I contemplated putting this song at the very top, but since Reach is no longer making music, and by the time 2018 rolled around he made some good music, it was enough for me to negate it from the top. That said, I can't stand this song, and the reason comes down to execution. Bollywood Stunna is trying to call back to 2014 trap that was popularized by DJ Snake, Diplo, and Yellow Claw. Minimalistic trap where the bass and beat drops were the main selling point, and sometimes the leads would have some energy to them. The problem is, not only is that era of trap aged rather badly, but Bollywood Stunna brings out the absolute worst aspects. From the obnoxious air horn melody, the percussion that's pushed so close to the mix that it sounds frail, a lack of sustainable bass. It's 2014 trap at its worst, being annoying yet too empty to contain anything else. But that's some of the more obvious stuff. And if it was just that, it would have had a shot on this list, but not this high. What really does it for me is the cheap synthetic creation of it all. I've said that 2014 trap hasn't aged well for a reason, but at least songs like Turn Up For What and DJ Turn It Up were self-aware of its own cheapness, which is why most of the songs have synth tones. Whereas this tries to add in organic Middle Eastern elements, yet they all sound like they come from a keyboard preset. So on top of being irritating, it also fails on its whole aesthetic because of how noticeably fake it all sounds. Again, I was considering putting this at the top of the list. So you know which songs are worse? Number 2. Like I said before, 2017 was the year that hardcore excelled. Plenty of newcomers and familiar faces showed up to the label to provide some happy hardcore songs. Kayzo's This Time was popular along with Holy, and while they were not my cup of tea, they had their place in the mosh pits. And while I'm not super crazy for Rip to Pieces or Us Against the World, the songs are still great anthems. Most of the hardcore that came out felt like it had its place in 2017, and most of the artists I at least got the appeal of. Except for one. And while he's made some good songs, most of his catalog was bad back then, and has only gotten worse with age. But if you want the epitome of why I don't like this artist, I can just point to this. When it comes to hardcore acts on this label, I consider Gammer to be near the bottom. Whereas Darren Styles and Stonebank had bright melodies, and Kayzo had energy and rougher distorted sound design, all I got from Gammer was either this bad attempt at drunken energy, or he was just copying formulas from the previous 3 artists and doing it worse. And while Beam of Light I have found to be decent, Let's Get Crunk was an empty, repetitive mess. The drop I consider to be one of the most overrated dubstep tunes on the label, and the remixes, they did not help matters. And while the general attitude always felt like it was making dumb party music, it was almost always bad party music, where collaboration with Riot 10 makes way too much sense. But for me, this was easily his worst song this year. It's a song that starts out fine with Dylan Matthew begging someone to stay tonight, and that it's fine if what she wants is a breakup, and then Gammer ruins it by turning him into Alvin and the Chipmunks and giving us a lead that sounds like an elephant getting set on fire, along with the detuned horns on the dubstep switch up. And yes, that would make this combination of hardcore and dubstep. So now all I can think about is how much of a bad ripoff of This Time by Kayzo it is, which makes it the second song on this list to do that. And what you get is one of the most obnoxious songs on the label. And yes, even by today's standards. I'm not staying the night. I'm packing my bags and walking out the door. Number 1. And here we are, the worst Monstercat song of 2017. The one that irked me the most. Here's the thing with a lot of these picks for the worst of 2017. As much as I don't like these tracks, or downright hate them, my reaction is, well, it's from an early era. Kayzo and Bishu were just experimenting with their own style. For Nitro Fun, it was really the only dud he had for quite a while. And for Dirtyphonics, well, I don't need to say much. I doubt they're playing Watch Out now. Plus, it helps where the songs weren't super big hits, or at the very least, the songs in question got eclipsed by better material. This is an exception, although not in a good way, because this duo has made some awful material before getting onto the label, debuted with this, and has been improving at a snail's pace to the point where the problems from years ago are still present. But worst of all, this song became one of Monstercat's biggest hits in 2017, and if this song is trying to be super, then get me my kryptonite. When I first listened to Slander with All You Need to Know, I was shocked to learn how hated they were. Until I looked further into the catalog and I found out immediately why. They started out with a bunch of hard trap songs with Nightmare, none of which were good, as well as starting on a new genre called Heaven Trap with mixed results. And while I liked songs like Love Again or their Now or Never remix, most of the tracks were thin, empty, and completely lacking any of the punch they need to make the style work. And the worst was when they tried to make a horrible hard trap song like After All with Yuki. But for the moment, if they made the occasional disaster, they were just kinda there for me. Then Superhuman became a thing and convinced everyone that they wanted the thin mixdowns and non-energy of their trap material converted to future bass. If you heard this song enough times, you'll know what I'm talking about. The flat, lifeless saw pads combined with the bad percussion blending of that metallic knock and trap beat, the chipmunk vocals, is one of the biggest non-payoffs to this day. At least with that, he was relaxed enough that it could get away with it somewhat, whereas this is trying to set up as some massive song, but has none of the power to do it. And if that isn't bad enough, that's before I tell you, that's the most interesting thing that happens in this song, because the rest of it is a piano ballad where the piano sounds like a cheap preset. Erica Leva's vocals, despite being the best thing about this song, are completely wasted, and the closest thing we get to a build-up is when they chop up the vocals. When re-listening to this song, I legit forgot how boring this is. How is it that Marshmello had better production with Alone, and the Chainsmokers made a better song about being super in the same year? I would say they've gotten better over the years. The mixing has some body, and at least they're nailing the atmosphere, until I realized most of their songs nowadays are collaborations with other producers like William Black or Son Hollow. And their last solo produced song was as stiff as it could get breaks track with Black Bear. And thus, I'm not seeing much improvement from the duo compared to this. The combination of the song itself, the fact that producers have barely escaped the flaws of said track, and the fact that it has 49 million views on Spotify, making it one of the biggest Monstercat songs of 2017, that's what ultimately got this to number 1, making it the worst Monstercat song of 2017. Trust me, this feeling is indeed a grand delusion. So yeah, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed what you saw there, please be sure to like and subscribe, really appreciate it. Be sure to be on the lookout for the best list that's coming out in a few days, but until then, I will see you all soon.